Chapter 1. The Woman of Stone. Alexandria Stein was walking back to the house. She'd taken the bus to and from the SCSU campus today. She didn't really like taking the bus, but for the time being, she didn't really have a choice in the matter. She didn't have consistent access to a car at the moment. She actually owned a car, but it was currently sitting in her parents' driveway, which was in northern North Shore. It was safe to say she probably wouldn't be getting it back anytime soon. The bus from Fort Sandlin to SCSU didn't actually enter the base. Instead, it dropped passengers off at the bus stop by the interstate. Passengers would then need to walk a few blocks to the fort entrance, where they had to go through a checkpoint to enter the base. In Alex's case, she'd have to walk another half-mile to reach the house she was staying in with the Ricardos. On days like today, when the weather was nice, it wasn't a bad walk. She actually enjoyed it quite a bit. Days where it was windy or spewing some manner of precipitation from the sky were another story entirely. Walking was a lot less fun in the rain. Even then, it still wasn't that bad. On base, there was usually always something interesting going on. She actually saw something rather interesting just a few minutes ago. She might have been mistaken, but she was pretty sure she saw Major Hanson unloading a massive rifle. Said rifle was just about as tall as the Major was. It also looked like it weighed quite a bit. Never in a million years did she think she would find herself in a situation where people carrying massive guns around would be a regular occurrence. This wasn't a first either. She actually witnessed Major Hanson carrying that one-man artillery piece around a few other times before. She suspected he took it somewhere every other day of the week. She couldn't help but wonder what Major Hanson did with it. Obviously, he was probably shooting it, but she wondered if there was more to it than that. There was a chance that Cesar might know. She knew that Cesar and Major Hanson used to hang out before all of this started. She was pretty sure the two of them spent even more time together now. She actually found the relationship between Cesar and Major Hanson to be rather interesting. Nearly everyone in the city thought that Cesar was running the show. He was the one making the announcements and appearing on TV. In a sense, he seemed a bit presidential. Major Hanson was quite different. She knew from eavesdropping on Cesar and Silas that Major Hanson wielded just as much, if not more power than Cesar did. The key difference was that Major Hanson stayed out of the spotlight. As a result, a few people in the city knew of him, but very few actually knew him. With a bit of a jump, she shifted her backpack a bit further up her back. She was now just getting back from class. It was the end of the world, yet school kept right on going. She could thank Cesar for that. When he became Swift City's glorious leader, keeping the schools open and operating everything like normal was one of his biggest priorities. A lot of the people started calling him the Swift City Dictator and the Great Leader, or at least that's what a lot of people on campus were calling him. It started mostly with the nerds. As the story goes, they were salty about having to birth a robust digital currency in less than a week. A few of them compared Swift City to North Korea. To be fair, she did agree that there were a lot more similarities between Swift City and North Korea than there should be. The armed guards and the walls were good examples. She paused her train of thought to wonder how North Korea was doing. You would think that a country with closed borders like North Korea would fare the best in a global zombie apocalypse. After pondering it for a moment, she shrugged and continued thinking about Cesar. Very little news about the outside world was available within the walls, another parallel with North Korea. So no one really knew what was happening in the rest of the world. Overall, Caesar's rule had been received pretty well so far. Everyone liked him for the most part, and it made sense. He was pretty awesome. He was smart, handsome, athletic, and he was extremely compassionate. He was one of the best guys she knew. He was genuine and honest, and the people of Swift City could sense that. Surprisingly, everyone seemed to trust him a lot more than what strictly made sense. After all, he was barely over 20. Back before Z-Day, he wasn't even old enough to run for Congress. On the topic of Cesar, it occurred to her that she hadn't seen him around much lately at all. That was probably to be expected for someone with his responsibilities, but she hoped he would start spending more time at home. Never in a million years did she think she'd be living under the same roof as him. It was something she imagined a few times during passing daydreams, but even then, she thought it would have taken something just as crazy as a zombie apocalypse to make those dreams come true. From what she pieced together, whenever he wasn't working on stuff for Swift City, he was out looking for Sylvia. Alex really wished that someone cared about her as much as Cesar cared about Sylvia. Not just anyone, but specifically Cesar would have been ideal. But it was clear to her that he was focused on Sylvia like a laser. It was a good thing he was so busy with city stuff. If he wasn't, his obsession with Sylvia would put him on the border of insanity. Alex turned down a street. She quickened her pace as she prepared to pass by two soldiers who were walking in the other direction. The soldiers didn't look like they were in a particular hurry. As a matter of fact, her gut told her that both soldiers were a bit intoxicated. It was pretty evident from the way that they were walking. Pathetic, she thought sharply as she eyed them up and down. Upon further reflection, her initial thought softened a bit. Because of how busy stuff was, it was easy to forget the magnitude of everything that was happening. Everyone in the city lost a lot of loved ones. Under normal circumstances, there would have been a lot of grieving if 10,000 people died in a tragedy. And that was the death toll just in Swift City. It was assumed that nationally, hundreds of millions of people were dead or zombies. Those two morons probably lost family too, Alex thought. Although drinking was a stupid way to cope, she decided she couldn't really fault them too much for it. On the other hand, maybe they didn't have a bunch of personal tragedies. They could both just be moronic soldiers with drinking problems. It didn't seem like a good idea to figure out which option it was. She sighed and thought, Alex, you always think the worst things. She passed by them and pushed the whole encounter out of her mind. A few steps later, she heard a loud whistle. It almost startled her, but a second later she realized what it was. She figured out the intent behind it a second after that. Immediately, she flushed and felt self-conscious. She could feel her face heating up. She resisted the urge to turn around and confront the morons. That probably wouldn't end well for her. She tensed up and quickened her pace even more while counting the seconds. After she reached 10 seconds, she started to relax slowly. Although she was in the middle of the base, she didn't feel entirely safe. The SCDF did an excellent job of keeping order. Excellent wasn't perfect, though. She heard a few stories of girls who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The number of hopeless, violent guys with a tendency towards abusiveness was at an all-time high in post-Z-Day Swift City. It was the natural consequence of the whole economy being remade in a single weekend. Some people were still out of jobs, and a lot of people who did have jobs were working on things that were completely different from what they were doing before the disaster. The SCDF couldn't be everywhere at once. That meant that a woman needed to be careful when in areas where the desperate men were likely to be. Alex felt like the base was pretty safe, but she definitely noticed that she was being more careful now than she was before about where she went alone after dark. With the two soldiers now a block behind her, she found her thoughts drifting back to Cesar. She was pretty sure that he was doing more engineering work now than he was while he was in school. As a consequence of being promoted to the position of Swift City dictator, Cesar dropped out of college. Alex got the sense that he was very sad about this, but he didn't have any other options. Both school and leading the city were equally time-consuming, so it was really a one or the other type of choice. She smiled. It was funny in a way. Cesar, an engineering dropout, promoted Silas, a high school grad with no college experience, to the position of chief Swift City engineer. Now the two of them were bossing around all of the actual engineers in town to build all the crazy stuff from the Black Book. Talk about nepotism. It was very fortunate that both of them were actually competent. This is how Cesar and Silas spent most of their time, actually. When Cesar wasn't busy with leadership stuff or looking for Sylvia, he was busy drawing up designs for Silas to make. Silas would then take them and work with the Swift City manufacturing community to make them happen. It was actually really impressive how much the two brothers had gotten done with this system. Swift City was currently unrecognizable from the Swift City of just a few weeks ago. She finally reached the Ricardo's base house. She walked up the pathway to the entryway. Once she reached the front door, she punched in the key code to unlock it. The house was one of the nicer houses on the base. She didn't think it was quite as nice as her parents' house, but she liked this one well enough. It had a 2-stall connected garage, 2 above-ground stories, and a front and backyard. The backyard had no trees, but it did have a nicely trimmed perimeter of 6-foot-high hedges. The house itself was painted light gray. It was in good shape and it had been well taken care of. The inside felt much larger than it looked from the outside. The main floor featured a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and one bedroom. That bedroom was currently being used for storage. There was a hallway through the middle that ran from the front door straight to the back door. The living room and bedroom were on one side. The kitchen and the dining room were on the other side. From the living room, a set of stairs led up to the second level. The second level had 4 bedrooms, a patio that extended out over the garage, and a single bathroom. This bathroom was designated the girls' bathroom. Cesar and Silas stayed away from it during the mornings. Alex's bedroom was the one upstairs across from Aurora's. Downstairs was where Cesar and Silas spent most of their time when they were home. The basement ran the full length of the garage and the house. It was a giant open space with the exception of a mechanical room and a third and final bathroom. Cesar and Silas took advantage of this to set up their home base of operations. They squirreled all sorts of cool stuff down there. Cesar put up several whiteboards that were filled with plans, calculations, and sketches. Silas had several dozen different machines set up in various locations. He seemed to use the 3D printers the most. She spent a bit of time messing with some of the machines, but eventually Silas caught her and told her not to touch anything. Although normally very easygoing, Silas was super touchy about his raptor and his machines. She stepped in through the front door. After looking around for a few seconds, she confirmed that she was the first one home today. She headed to the kitchen. There, she got herself a glass of water. After that, she headed to the living room couch where she plopped down with her backpack. She pulled out her homework so she could start working on it. There were many days when she wondered if she made the right choice when she decided to go into engineering. She found the classes enjoyable, but the homework really sucked. That's why she wanted to get it done right away. The sooner she finished it, the sooner she could get on to doing stuff she actually enjoyed. It had been about 2 weeks since the zombies wrecked her life. Back then, when she wasn't busy with school or chores, she liked to bake. And she liked to walk around town. She actually liked running too, but it was harder to see that as a leisure activity. She wanted to get back into some of that stuff, but it was easier said than done. Food was plentiful but not abundant, and the outside world was dangerous, so baking and running were more or less off the table for the time being. Shortly after Swift City settled into the new normal, Silas took her and Aurora aside. He gave them a quick and very unexpected speech. From what Alex knew of Silas, this was extremely out of the ordinary for him, which meant the topic was obviously something he felt was important enough to discuss. The whole speech boiled down to something along the lines of Swift City is now the Wild West with zombies. He acknowledged that the SCDF was acting as a police force, but pointed out that they couldn't be everywhere at once. One line from that speech in particular stuck with Alex. If a zombie gets you, or worse, if someone with nothing left to lose gets you, we probably won't find your bodies, Silas said while making a slashing motion across his throat. Both she and Aurora understood what he meant. Needless to say, since then, she hadn't been getting out very much. She went for a walk or a run maybe once or twice a week. She got the sense that Silas would have preferred if she didn't go out even that much. So she kept the excursions on the down low. Every time she went out, she was always amazed at how much the city was transforming. It helped for sure that they were heading into mid-spring. Things were starting to turn green and the days were getting noticeably longer and warmer. It provided a nice contrast to all the death and destruction that was raging all around. On the topic of that death and destruction, there wasn't a day that went by when she didn't think of her parents or her younger brothers. It was assumed that they were among the 9,000-ish dead citizens of Swift City. It was because of them that she could fully understand why someone would want to get drunk and stay drunk. One of the first things Caesar did when he took office was right in line with the actual actions of a true dictator. He took a leaf out of Orwell's book and registered everyone in town. It was basically a census, but with less anonymity. To participate in the new credit system, everyone needed to visit Fort Sandlin and provide a bunch of their personal information. They needed to have their name, social security number, current address, email, phone number, and then any bank accounts they wanted to be converted into credits. He and Captain Winters told the public that it was just a tool to help figure out who was missing and who wasn't. Most people bought that. Alex wasn't so easily convinced it was a good idea. She thought it was obvious to anyone with a brain that once the SCDF had that baseline info for everyone, they could easily cross-reference it with social media to fill in a lot of blanks people would rather have blank. She thought there was a lot of potential for mischief with that kind of information. After full integration, the SCDF would basically know everything they could ever want to know about everyone in the city. Alex didn't think Cesar would do anything bad with that information, but she wasn't so certain about other people in the SCDF. Captain Winters seemed kinda sketchy in her opinion. Beside the Great Registration, Alex thought the SCDF was actually doing a good job of managing the current situation. During her walks through the city, she witnessed the progress they were making firsthand. As of earlier this week, there were now only 5 entrances into Swift City. Each one was heavily fortified. From dinner table talk, she understood that Cesar and Hanson worked together to come up with a layout for each checkpoint. She checked out the closest one just a few days ago. The checkpoint consisted of a channel of walls that went into the city from the outer wall. The channel was about 100 feet long. The walls that made up the channel were the same design as the walls used on the outer wall, with one important exception. The checkpoint channel walls were only 10 feet tall instead of the usual 20 feet. The 2 walls that made up the channel were about 30 feet away from each other. This left enough room for even the largest of trucks to enter or exit the city. 30 feet from the end of the channel and 130 feet into the city from the outer wall stood a large concrete bunker. This bunker was centered on the channel so it could provide a covered firing position down the whole length of the channel. Besides the bunker, there was also a large 16-ton concrete door that was attached by a massive hinge to the very end of each channel wall. These walls were on locking rollers that allowed them to be slid into place with just a moment's notice. These doors allowed traffic when the checkpoint was open, but also made it impossible to enter or exit the city when the checkpoint was closed. Like nearly everything new in the city, the bunker and the doors were made from concrete, sucker rod, and drill pipe. Alex thought this made them look much more intimidating than they would be otherwise. Besides the walls and the bunker, Cesar and Hanson concocted a few other ideas to further beef up the defenses for the checkpoints. There were walkways along the interior side of the channel walls that allowed soldiers to stand along the wall. From there, the soldiers could shoot at anything dumb enough to enter the channel. Closer to the outer wall, there were 2 of those 50-foot tall watchtowers that could now be found all over the city. These 2 towers, along with the bunker, provided highly protected places to fire from. Then there were the traps. The traps were not public knowledge. The only reason she could pick them out was because she overheard Cesar and Silas discussing them in the basement. They'd left the basement door open while she was in the kitchen. Silas called the main trap sucker puckers. Anyone driving through one of the checkpoint channels would notice that there were stems of sucker rods seemingly mounted on the walls every so many feet. A closer inspection would reveal that they were actually mounted every 20 feet. What it wouldn't reveal is that the sucker rods were actually mounted to pivot points that allowed them to swing in a 180-degree arc. These pivots were hydraulically powered and frankly quite terrifying. With the push of a button from inside the bunker, a person could trigger 10 rows of 20-foot-long sucker rod to swing across the channel with about 12,000 pounds of force. The tips of the rod traveled at a speed close to 85 miles per hour. Silas admitted that the trap probably wouldn't stop any vehicles, but if anything fleshy got into one of the channels, the rods would turn it into a mess. Alex found the thought of this to be horrific, but she realized that she wasn't technically supposed to know about it, so she didn't really have anyone to complain to. Based on the rest of that basement discussion, she was expecting flamethrowers to get added to the checkpoints as well at some point in the near future. Other than that one time, she usually stayed away from the checkpoints and even the outer wall for that matter. If she really wanted to play it safe, she could have just stayed on base, but that made it much less fun to walk or run. Although it was still much more fun than doing homework. After about an hour of effort, she managed to get about 6 statics problems done. Suddenly, she heard a car stop in the driveway. It sounded like it was probably Aurora. It was usually pretty clear when Silas got home. The Raptor distinctly announced his arrival. About a minute later, the front door opened. Aurora walked in. Alex was immediately surprised. Aurora looked like crap. Most of her hair looked like it escaped the bun that was trying to contain it. Her face was red and she looked sweaty, almost like she'd been crying. Makeup was a rare commodity these days, so the usual telltale signs of runny mascara weren't there. The only giveaway was the minute traces of dried salt. Aurora stepped into the living room, dropped her backpack on the floor, and then collapsed into a recliner. Alex was quiet for a few seconds before she asked, "What happened?" Aurora sat up in the recliner. She said bluntly, "I look like shit." Before Alex could say anything, Aurora launched into a massive data dump about how her day went. For starters, she dropped her coffee right outside the front doors of the school. When she knelt down to pick up her cup, one of her classmates, an asshole named Brett Hodney, kicked her right into the coffee puddle. She got it all over her skirt and her blouse. She didn't have gym today, so she didn't have extra clothes with her. After that, everyone looked at her weird for the rest of the day. She got homework in every class, and one of her teachers made a comment about how it's a sad day when the most powerful person in the city can't even get his family members clean clothes. "I'm just sick of it. I want to do something useful. I'm tired of wasting all of this time in school with a bunch of freaking morons." Aurora finished with a yell. She was now tearing up again. She was even redder in the face than when she came in. Alex closed her statics book. She walked over and curled up next to Aurora on the recliner to give her a half hug. Then she said, "I'm sorry today went so rough, but school is useful even if it doesn't seem like it." Aurora glared at Alex. Then she said, "You sound like Cesar." "High school was bad enough when things were normal. Now it just sucks," she added bitterly. Alex decided to remain quiet. She knew that Aurora wasn't completely wrong. Alex hated high school quite a lot. She thought that college was way better. As a matter of fact, she was pretty sure she'd pick zombie college over normal pre-zombie high school. She could relate a lot to how Aurora was feeling. That's why they were best friends after all. High school sucked in general, but high school really sucked for talented girls. The spectrum of maturity was just so broad. On one end of the spectrum, you had well-adjusted kids who were ready for adulthood and the real world. On the other side of the spectrum, you had kids who were so immature that they were basically a menace to society. All of these people were then forced to spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week with each other. It was a recipe for disaster. In Aurora's case, it was especially bad. Like Alex, Aurora was obviously beautiful and very talented. She was also Caesar's little sister, so in addition to the usual abuse that she'd get from people who were jealous of her, she'd also probably get additional flack from people who thought Cesar was doing a crappy job. Alex didn't know what to tell her, so she just sat there with Aurora. She didn't know what else to do. After a few minutes, she had an idea that might help get Aurora's mind off the day. "Hey, would you want to help me with the dishes?" Alex asked earnestly. With a long sigh, Aurora said, "Yeah, I suppose we should probably clean up after the lazy slobs." Alex laughed and said, "I don't know if I'd call them lazy. I think they just have a higher tolerance for clutter than we do." "Yeah, exactly. And they know it. It's downright exploitation," Aurora half growled. Alex smiled. It was working. Aurora was transitioning from woe is me mode to time to pick up after my dumbass brothers mode. They both got up and headed to the kitchen where they started doing dishes. After that, they branched off to tackle some of the other household chores that needed doing. About an hour later, they were done. They both plopped down in the living room again. This time, they fired up the TV and started watching Netflix. Alex was so thankful for the fact that Swift City was home to a regional data center. When things were going down on Z-Day, someone smart had the bright idea to download as much of the internet as possible. Unfortunately, that wasn't actually that much, but they managed to get most of the good stuff. Some new content creation was starting up, but it would be a long time before any new movies or TV shows were made. When they were nearing the halfway point in their movie of choice, Alex heard the familiar sound of Silas pulling into the driveway. A few minutes later, the front door opened and Silas walked in. She noted that he was covered in oil and grease. He must have had a fun time with whatever he'd gotten into. "Hey," Silas said when he saw the girls sitting in the living room. "There's food in the fridge," Aurora called out. Alex watched as Silas walked to the kitchen. She heard the fridge open up. Then she heard a microwave fire up. A few minutes later, Silas appeared from the kitchen carrying a plate of pasta. With the pasta in hand, he headed up to his room. She heard the sound of the door closing. "Nice to see you too, Silas," Aurora muttered, casually flipping the middle finger to the stairwell. About an hour later, the girls heard the sound of another vehicle stopping out front of the house. Alex sat up to look out the window, but by now it was too dark to see anything. About a minute later, the front door opened. Cesar stepped inside. He locked the door behind him. Cesar saw the two girls sitting in the living room. He took off his shoes and then walked into the living room where he sat down in the middle of the floor. Once he was settled, he said, "Hey." Aurora waved at him to acknowledge that she heard him. Alex raised a hand to wave as well. "How was school?" Cesar asked Aurora. "It was fine," Aurora lied. Alex gave her a quick side glance as if to say dishonesty is bad. She thought about commenting, but decided she should probably keep her mouth shut. "Just fine?" Cesar pressed. He seemed to sense that something was bugging Aurora. "Do you actually care?" Aurora retorted. Her frustration from the day was starting to bubble up from the cracks now. "Yes, very much so," Cesar said with raised eyebrows. Alex could tell that Cesar was now very much tipped off to the fact that Aurora clearly had a bad day. "I'm just tired of school. I feel like it's a waste of time," Aurora finally said after a pause. "All right. So if I said you didn't have to go to school anymore, what would you do instead?" Cesar asked inquisitively. He was now making direct eye contact with her. Alex was pretty sure he was being serious. Aurora sat up. She was now very interested in the conversation. "Are you saying that's an option?" she asked, making no effort to hide her excitement. "That depends on what your plan would be. If you can convince me that you're better off doing something else besides school, then I won't stop you from dropping out," Cesar said calmly. "I could work for you," Aurora suggested. "You could, but that seems like it would be a waste of your talents. I think that if you decide to quit school, you need to find something that you're willing to invest just as much time in," Cesar said, and then added, "This is probably something you should spend some time thinking about. I don't think school is bad enough where you need to rush to get away from it." "Well, you'd be wrong then," Aurora muttered, but she nodded to indicate that she'd think about it. Changing the subject, she asked, "Any luck with your hunt today?" Cesar sighed. It was his turn to be on the ropes. He said, "No, not really. I'm confident that she wasn't in North Shore when the outbreak started. I can't completely prove it, but her car isn't in any of the bridge traffic cam footage. So it seems like a good sign that she was south of the river when shit hit the fan." Everyone was quiet for a few seconds. To break the silence, he asked, "So, Alex, how did your day go?" Alex looked up. She was staring at the floor, thinking about Caesar's Sylvia situation. It took her a few seconds to remember how her day was. It took a few more seconds after that for her to remember how to talk. "It was fine, just the usual class stuff," she stammered. "What did you do all day?" Aurora asked Cesar. "Nothing fun, I'm afraid. I spent most of the morning sitting through meetings. After that, I went over to the reactor complex. I spent the rest of the day there," he answered. "Why were you at the power plant? Did something happen?" Aurora asked. Alex could detect a hint of concern in her voice. "No, everything is fine for now. I was just talking with Professor Rogers. He has some concerns about how we're using the reactors. He thinks we're running them outside of their optimal efficiency range. Of the 4, only 1 is currently up and running. We're not using enough power to justify having all 4 fired up at once," Cesar explained. "Besides that," he continued, "he wanted us to figure out some way to schedule some downtime. They have some maintenance they need to do on the control rods. He thinks the rods are down at the city rail yard, but he's not going to bring them to campus until he knows he'll have time to do the work." How are you going to get him some downtime? I thought the reactors were the only thing we have powering the city," Aurora asked with a frown. "They are right now, but I have a few ideas for how we could use natural gas to keep the lights on. We have a few rail cars of the stuff down at the rail yard. The main problem is that it might not last long enough," Cesar answered. "That's not a big deal. With all the beans you've been eating lately, I bet you could power the city by yourself," Aurora jabbed out of the blue. She was now grinning. "Wow, Aurora, I can't say I expected a fart joke out of you. But I'd like to point out the fact that you've been eating just as much as I have, and I'm not the one who always has the night farts. Your broom sounds like a shooting range half the time," Cesar fired back. Aurora flushed red. Alex started laughing. Cesar was right. Their current diet didn't completely agree with Aurora's digestive system. She'd heard the midnight shooting range in Aurora's room a few times too. "What the hell, Cesar?" Aurora asked. She clearly thought he'd gone too far with that one. If you ever get married, I'm sure that's exactly what your husband will say too. He'll have to wear a Kevlar vest to bed, Caesar put on a mock sneer. In a fit of mock rage, Aurora threw a half-empty water bottle at his head. He snatched the bottle out of the air and then took a drink. Thanks, he said, tipping an imaginary hat. You're not welcome, you turd, Aurora growled. Oh, come on, you know you love me, Caesar teased. She said nothing back to that. Caesar mimed that he was heartbroken. Alex decided to change the subject. So, if we were to run all 4 reactors, what would we do with all that power, she asked. That's a good question, actually, Caesar pursed his lips for a second. I was thinking we could actually use it for electrolysis. We're going to run out of diesel and gasoline in the next few months, so we really need to have some sort of alternative lined up, he explained. What's electrolysis? Aurora asked. Why don't you tell her, Alex? Caesar said with a hand wave. Alex wasn't expecting to get put on the spot, but she actually knew enough about the topic to not sound like a moron. She turned to Aurora and explained, electrolysis is a process that uses electricity to separate pure water into hydrogen and oxygen. It's not very efficient, but if you have a lot of excess power, it can make economic sense. Exactly, Caesar said. He then added, I'm pretty sure we can get the infrastructure set up in a few weeks. After that, we should have access to a continuous supply of hydrogen, which we can use in any engine that has spark plugs with just a few modifications. It should keep us going even after we run out of gasoline. We'll still have a problem with the diesel vehicles, but one problem at a time. That bothered Alex a bit. She was pretty sure it wouldn't be that simple. She remembered what a renewable energy class covered. The biggest challenge with hydrogen was containment followed by energy density. It was hard to hold it somewhere, and it was hard to hold enough of it to generate a useful amount of power. How exactly are you planning on storing the hydrogen? Don't you need special high-pressure tanks if you're going to get the same kind of range you can with a gas-powered engine? Alex asked with a frown. Yeah, but we don't need to have exactly the same range. It'll be a long time before we have people going out on road trips again. For the time being, we basically just need something that can get a vehicle about 100 miles. Most people in town have to drive less than 5 miles a day. So if we can pull off 100 miles of hydrogen-powered range, people would only have to fill up once a month unless they're driving on the weekends. But anyway, ideally, everyone would actually be using electric vehicles. That way, we can charge them straight from the reactors, Caesar explained. Alex was satisfied with his answer. It was clear that he was at least thinking about everything involved. She decided to hold back on asking her other questions. The concept of a hydrogen-powered city captured her curiosity, but she could see that Caesar was tired from a long day. He didn't need to be putting up with her. Aurora didn't have Alex's misgivings about pestering Caesar. Where are you going to make this hydrogen at? She asked. Down by the river next to the reactors in the SCSU campus. I have half the university working on the design right now, Caesar explained. Is the hydrogen good for anything else? Aurora asked. She really seemed to be getting into this. Caesar smiled gleefully. Then he said, yeah, you can use it for a lot of different things. I have a few ideas that it could help with, but they're still in the design phase. Like what? Aurora asked more playfully now. Instead of answering right away, Caesar stood up and yawned. Then he said, you'll have to wait and see. I need to get to bed. I have a full schedule tomorrow. So good night, girls. That's a lame excuse, Aurora said. She threw a sock at him, but then she added, good night, though. Good night, Alex chimed in. She didn't throw any socks. Caesar waved before he headed up the stairs to his room. Alex watched him until he disappeared from view. The diesel problem was a tricky one to solve. She was pretty sure most of the heavy equipment, the most useful stuff at least, was diesel-powered. She wasn't sure how Caesar was going to address that. Biodiesel might be an option, but she wasn't sure how that was made or if they'd be able to generate enough of it to keep the semis, trucks, and military vehicles running. She thought about it a few minutes longer. Then she pushed it out of her mind. She needed to get her homework done. It took her another half hour of focus to finish all of it up. Once she was done, she spent a few more minutes chatting with Aurora about the show they were watching. Then she started to feel tired herself. I think I'm going to go to bed too, she declared after a long yawn. Without saying a thing, Aurora made a dismissive motion. Alex laughed at this and then got up. She made her way up the stairs. Once she reached the top, she walked to her room. Along the way, she passed Caesar's room. The door was wide open, so she couldn't resist a quick glance in. Inside, Cesar was passed out on his bed. He hadn't even bothered to undress. He still had his socks on. She checked to make sure the coast was clear. Then she stepped into his room. She quickly pulled his socks off, tossing them into his laundry basket. Then she grabbed a spare blanket, which she tossed over him. She paused for just a moment to take in the scene. He looked so peaceful when he was sleeping. That made her smile. Satisfied, she left the room, closing the door quietly as she went. She walked back to her room. Once she was inside, she closed and locked the door. She didn't lock it because she was worried about anyone living in the house. The lock just made her feel a bit safer in general. Safety was a feeling she desperately craved these days. She took a minute to change into her night clothes. That process involved stripping down to her underwear, ditching her bra, and then putting on a loose t-shirt and running shorts. Once she was dressed for bed, she spent a few minutes braiding her hair. Right when she reached the halfway point, she realized she forgot to brush her teeth. She thought about skipping it, but then decided that would be a bad idea. She forced herself to the door. She unlocked it, dragging herself to the bathroom. There, she spent the next 2 minutes brushing and flossing her teeth. Toothpaste was on the list of stuff she was worried about. She wasn't sure how the city would get more when they ran out, so she was making every effort to use as little toothpaste as she possibly could. That was one of the many things she hoped they didn't run out of. If they did, she would dearly miss the feeling of minty freshness. Once she finished, she headed back to her room. She locked the door for the second time. Then she climbed into bed. She rolled over onto her side so she could see out her window. She spent her last few minutes of consciousness gazing at the stars. Despite the city light pollution, they still looked really pretty. She found them to be comforting. The stars reminded her that even in times like this, when the whole planet seemed to be in chaos, the earth continued to spin and the stars continued to trace out their paths through the heavens. Then she fell asleep.